It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. We are on episode 162, recorded on this day, the 25th of June 2026. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack. G'day, mate. How are you today?
Well,
we haven't had much of a chance to chat. What's going on in Hong Kong?
it's hot and sweaty. People are starting to disappear for the summer. Some people still have the magic contracts here that pay you, put you on a business class flight back to wherever you come from.
Or indeed to other parts of Southeast Asia. A number of my friends are in Koh Samui. Well, one friend, I should say, is in Koh Samui, spends his time in Koh Samui, spends his leisure time in Koh Samui, shall we say?
Yep, there are. If you can squeeze past all the Russians and Ukrainians, it's quite pleasant.
Yeah, so they tell me in Thailand in particular. All right.
And Bali these days, I'm sure. Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Yep. Mm.
Gee, I tell you what, who'd make worse tourists? Australians or the Russians? Probably the Russians would be a bit better. Behave themselves a bit more.
I'm told that the Russians and Ukrainians get on fine in Thailand and Indonesia.
Look, another thing that we're probably not discussing this week is the Ukraine's astonishing comeback. We did mention it a little bit last week, but there's some stuff that we want to probably go through in a little bit more detail. And there may be a sort of major shift underway. Jack, there's only one bridge linking Russia from Crimea now.
Mm.
And that's sort of the distant one in the past, and the rest of the territory is actually being claimed by Ukraine. So that in itself is very interesting, and we'll have to have a look at that. But meanwhile, we've got some domestic politics to look into, and it would seem, and we'll get to the exact progress in a moment, but we've seen the budget's got its way through. After consultation with the Greens, some further amendments, some agreements in principle about watching the NDIS spending the Greens have insisted upon, and the Greens also apparently insisted upon the non-use of personal super for purchase of houses. That's for self-funded superannuation, Jack.
I understand the Greens haven't agreed on the NDIS. What they've got out of the government is an agreement to extend the committee.
To talk about it a bit later.
But they say that they won't agree to it, in which case the government will need to find the support from the other players, including the Liberal Party, I would think, which I think they'll probably get. I think there's apart from the Greens, there's a general acceptance that something needs to be done about the NDIS.
It led Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to say that the problem would only cost, or the negotiations to get the support from the Greens in the Senate would only cost a few $100 million. That was the quote, few $100 million. I guess that's where we're at now in Commonwealth spending. But it seemed a little bit of a.
If you look around under the couch cushions, you'll find that.
It's a bit like that, isn't it? We can cut a bit here and cut a bit there, and we can get up to a couple of $100 million fairly quickly. Meanwhile, Jack, the opposition have almost sort of fouled themselves out of the debate, Jack, haven't they? And Dennis Shanahan was particularly scathing about
and accurate.
About the opposition leader, Angus, and he said the opposition leader was handed a political gift on budget day when the Treasurer presented the budget. According to the news poll, it was the worst received budget Now, Dennis writes, and then he gets up and he goes, basically, Taylor was given a penalty shot in front of goal, and goalkeeper Jim was prone with the cramps. He was struggling, but Angus missed, and he missed because of lack of preparation, getting distracted. We'll get to that. Tactical and strategic failures. No agenda of his own. It's a long list. And weak attack, dependent of silly rhymes, drop the flops. Oh, Jesus. Who comes up with these things, Jack? They ought to be murdered in their sleep. And empty alliteration, toxic taxes and dangerous deals. Yes, you can see the word.
Murder in their sleep's way too kind.
Wordsmiths in the office have been at work there. Yeah, let's come up with something that's alliterative. Or indeed rhyming, as Dennis suggests there.
They haven't looked like a well-run organisation at all, because the government has been spooked and on the ropes with the budget, and they haven't landed a blow.
They're sort of all over the place, Jack. Now we know they've got specific challenges, right? They've got essentially a political war on two fronts, but they seem to be. They seem to be ignoring one of those fronts, Jack, or indeed suing for peace with them while they take on Labor, but not even in the centre, Jack.
But they're not really taking on Labor. There's just no coherence to what they're doing.
It's a good point. It's a good point. We sort of wonder how this might all go. Let's just move on. But what passed from the budget, the appropriation bills, that's the sort of core funding stuff, is passed as usual. There's a convention there. It's not the law, but the Senate will pass appropriation bills after the 1975 dismissal. Tax reform package, the first tranche, the Treasury Laws Amendment Tax Reform No. 1 Bill and Related Rates Bill passed the House of Reps on 4th of June 2026. That includes the 250 working Australians tax offset. That's to kick in July 1, 27. The stage tax cuts continuation, that is the previous tax cuts that the Labor government went to the electorate with. So they were coming out on July 1. Early steps towards CGT negative gearing changes. It's almost a work in progress, isn't it? I guess around trusts more likely, Jack, just what's in and what's out there. There have been a number of concessions made by the government.
Put it this way, I wouldn't be planning my financial arrangements and setting them in concrete right now, because I'm not sure we know exactly what's going to be the end result.
That appears to be the sort of most common criticism from that financial sector, is that there's a sort of lack of certainty, that that there's a bit of a moving feast at the moment, and that makes it difficult for investors, superannuees, etc.
If there's two criticisms I'd make about the budget, one, it does nothing much about growth at all, and the second thing was it wasn't really well thought through. They hadn't really thought what the consequences of their decisions were going to be. They hadn't thought, who are we going to piss off with this stuff, right?
I think they thought that. What I'd say is the budget doesn't fit comfortably into there's no narrative around it. I know, I can probably almost sense some of our listeners rolling their eyes, but there needs to be a sort of overarching narrative to government, so people sort of know where we are and where we're going. And that's not just a criticism of the budget, but it can easily be seen as one of those things that sort of sits outside any kind of commonality in the way they're working. They will put it down to, the Labor government will put it down to releasing or easing pressures of cost of living, which are always difficult. I think they probably haven't had enough credit being given to the way they handled the fuel crisis, if we want to call it that, Jack.
Yeah, well, I suppose they deserve a little bit of credit for that, but really, it's just kind of there doesn't seem to be a lot of purpose to the place. I mean, that all.
Well, it's a fair old measure. I mean, Albo doing the run around Southeast Asia and into Canada, or with his Canadian associate, and the prices of petrol around here. There was a brief pause where unleaded petrol went to about $2.10, but then it sort of wandered down once the excise suspensions were made. The question is now, what do they do with it going forward? With oil, we'll get to this too, but with oil seemingly kind of moving through the Strait of Hormuz, how long do they keep it on for without it becoming an inflationary pressure?
Difficult to know the answer to that. I think you've got to play that. You've got to play each ball on its merit, so to speak. You've got to, not get ahead of yourselves and start playing something.
You don't want to wipe the tax. Well, it's an interesting one, Jack, because as we get more and more electric vehicles come onto the road, and it really is sort of starting to take on a really significant number in Australia now. Those people, of course, aren't paying for petrol, aren't paying for excise, which purportedly is used for road improvements and road repairs. So those people aren't paying a cracker; they're just charging up their cars at home, and those that buy petrol are having to essentially, carry that burden through the excise. So they really have to come up with a better way of doing that, don't they? Because
I don't think they'll rush into that. They'll wait to see till they've got a better handle on what the market penetration is going to be like, and then it will have to be rethought. They might have suggested they hang on to the excise suspension for 3 months, and that needs to be looked at the next budget. That we simply can't have a diminishing group of petrol purchasers paying essentially what is growing into about 20% of the market not paying anything. So the only kind of solution that you can come up with, and I understand why governments are loath to do this, is you'll have to come up with a new tax, and that's kind of a road user type tax, and I believe that's kind of where we're going. It probably is, but
user pays model. Clear. They still looked at the old, fill out your logbook sort of stuff as well. There are measures that are a lot uglier, Jack. You can GPS measure people in terms of the movements in their cars and things like that. Those things can be done now, but I suggest the government would not want to go down to that big brother sort of path, and they're probably going to have to rely on logbooks for the payment of road tax. Something of that order.
And that would be very unpopular, the keeping of logbooks.
But it has to be done. Otherwise, you'll drive into a pothole and you won't be able to get out of it. On the Hume.
Friends from Victoria tell me that's pretty much what it is there now.
Oh, gee, look, I haven't driven the road for a while, but you used to get this sense once you got into Wodonga or over the Murray that the roads were a hell of a lot smoother than they were in Sydney, in New South Wales, I should say. But the Albury bypass is a fairly schmick thing. That's a New South Wales thing. There's constant roadworks. It's very expensive, and you can't do it if you haven't got a tax base in which to do it. So that's something. One of those little challenges that's coming the government's way, but it can't sustain a group of size 20-30% from not paying road taxes while everyone else does. All right. Well, the budget. One of the issues I have with it, Jack, is that if you're looking to sell a strong political message around it, the sort of discernible benefits that they talk about are so far away, they're down the horizon, and people are going to go, what happens? There'll be a new government and things will change and blah, 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 right? So there's the young homeless or the young renters of our communities are not exactly dancing in the streets. So the benefits aren't there. or aren't felt while at this point, and while you've got the investment groups and all sorts of people coming around, entrepreneurs and one another, saying, well, this is destructive for us.
Well, the immediate impact of the budget, I presume, has been taking a lot of steam out of the residential property market.
Well, that's certainly happening. Yeah.
I mean, the auction clearance rates are well down, and it's probably
50%.
too early to make a definitive call on prices, but they always follow that down, or at least flatten out the rate of increase in property prices, and that's been I'm kind of presuming it's a bit too early to call some of this stuff, but I'm presuming that's largely due to what's in the budget.
Declining house prices, though, would be a problem, a political problem for the government, even if house prices came off by, let's say, 10%. 10% is too much. Let's say 5%, where it might be 2%. The Treasury and the budget forecasts indicate that there will be growth of around about 2% on the residential property market across Australia for the next 12 months.
Personally, I think a drop of 5%, even perhaps 10%, can be dealt with politically, because that really only puts people back to where they were, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago.
Well, unless you've got equity in the house, Jack, and you've just acquired it.
No equity in the house.
You've just acquired it, so you don't have any. Or you've acquired it over the last few years, you've seen some growth, and then it slows. Not going to make
the majority
happy.
of people. The majority of people who have houses have had them for a lot longer than that. So you're talking about, it's the old art of government. Whatever you do, you're going to piss some people off. You just don't want that number to be too high, right?
Yeah, and look, we are hearing, anecdotally at least, that people, of course, you can negatively gear a property that's new as of July 1, 2027, but also of that date, if you purchase a place for investment and negatively gear that investment, you won't be getting any tax benefit. And the way that works is, if let's say you're earning $100,000 a year, you've got a differential between your rental income and your mortgage payment of, let's say, $35,000, and that means your taxable income becomes $65,000. So that's how negative gearing essentially works. But there's at least anecdotal evidence that people who have investment properties are looking to offload them, Jack.
Again, I actually think it takes a little while to get a clear picture of what's happening with this stuff, because it's little bits and pieces of evidence that have to be patched together, I guess, to get a clear picture.
Now, look, in our last episode, I indicated that we were going to have a look at, Jack suggested some things around the US Congress and their ability to eerily pick stock market winners, and we're going to have a bit of a broader discussion.
Than Warren Buffett, Jack.
Oh, no, look, you'd follow him to the grave. So, yeah, we're going to have a more expanded view of that. We're going to have a look at Trump and Putin, and some of our East African gang too are absolute rippers when it comes to helping themselves, and talk more generally around corruption in public office and what it means. So we'll put that aside, and we'll concentrate on a little bit of the questions around monoculture. Getting to that in a minute too, but before we go, of course, we must go to the UK, because as I wrote, it's to be published tomorrow, Labor is carrying Andy Burnham around in a sedan chair in the Commons, but it's not quite as simple as that. This will be the 7th Prime Minister in 10 years. Jack, that was Brexit 10 years ago. It's pretty warm outside. It's been pretty warm in the UK. 30 degrees in the UK, or certainly in London, is deeply unpleasant. and they're going okay in the World Cup. That's a little message you got from one of your mates in the UK. We have become Italy, the guy said. Well, thankfully, the UK soccer team, or the England soccer team, has returned to form and had a bit of a draw against Ghana. So things aren't looking that flash. But, Jack, it was entirely predictable. And I was reading over the weekend that Sir Keir Starmer was at the Prime Ministerial retreat, pondering his future, and decided he didn't have one in politics. His wife was said to be very angry with the sort of treatment that he had copped from his colleagues and from Andy Burnham. And he is said to be very angry himself. Has he only got himself to blame?
The person, I collected a lot of comments on this. It's a guy called Nick Robinson who works for the BBC, who I think got as close as anybody. He said, in all my years covering politics, I have never met anyone so lacking in an interest in the skills a leader needs: the ability to tell a story, to listen to colleagues, to woo, persuade and chivvy. Keir Starmer just isn't interested in those requirements of the job. He is dismissive and contemptuous of them. Another writer wrote that someone from inside the Prime Minister's office, that when they would take him down to the parliamentary tea room to talk to his parliamentary colleagues, he didn't make much effort. And when they got back to Downing Street, he would be furious and say, "Don't make me do that again." This is kind of what Kevin Rudd was like. Kevin Rudd forgot that he governed with
at the pleasure of the party,
the parliamentary party, right? And that there's ample evidence that was true of Keir Starmer as well. I mean, this is just how a Westminster parliamentary democracy works. You are only the first amongst equals. You are not like a US president.
More given to bureaucracy with its hard rules and so forth, Jack, and not the sort of camaraderie, collegiality that politicians require in leadership positions. So he will go. There's talk of him doing something, a sort of lap of honour, and I am struggling to understand how that could be effective.
He's going to do a lap of the TV room with a vase in his hand, is he?
Well, that's what they're saying. He'll be around. So where are we? He resigned on the 22nd of June earlier this week.
Well, announced an intention to resign. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. What role does the palace have at this stage, Jack?
Well, he didn't actually go to the palace. He telephoned the king, and the reason, I mean, if you're going to resign, when you resign, you have to do that in person. I think in the last days of the Queen's life, she had Boris Johnson and Liz Truss up there together up at Balmoral to do the changeover in person. So when it gets to that point,
that's a great line from comedian Stuart Lee. God bless the Queen for. She was determined to hang around just to see the end of Boris Johnson.
Yes, that may well have been the case. So at this stage, all he's done is announce an intention to resign when the Labor Party comes up with a new leader. And at that point, he will go to the palace and say, Your Majesty, I'm resigning. I'm resigning, and my advice to you is to appoint whoever it is, and we presume it will be my colleague, Mr. Burnham.
I imagine so. Are there any other likely contenders, Jack?
They all seem to have been bought off.
It seems that way, doesn't it? There might be a few angling for some portfolios that they don't especially like at the moment.
Yeah. What's his name? Darren Jones, who does a lot of the public speaking for the party and has while Starmer's been Prime Minister. He was considered sort of an outside chance, but he seems to have been placated with the offers of various jobs. Yes. Wes Streeting likewise.
Yes.
and I don't think David Miliband was ever a serious contender. So, yeah, I would say there probably won't be a contest. That there's nobody who could mount a opposition to him that would be effective at all.
There is talk, possibly gossip, that that if Miliband becomes the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the markets will go into freefall.
I'm not sure about going to freefall, but I don't think it'll be welcomed.
The UK has got a fairly significant bond debt issue, Jack. I mean, they've got a thumping public debt as well.
Yes,
but at twice ours.
And a huge interest bill, and I think UK gilts are now their bonds now have a return value of about 6%. So that tells you what it's costing them to borrow the money.
Yeah, so I mean that would seem, I would think, if Miliband is appointed to that portfolio, I think that would sort of signal. I mean, and they are apparently quite close friends, or at least used to be, Burnham and Miliband. But if he's selected, I guess that sets the tone. According to my sources, you call it a bit of unhappiness. There will be a fairly significant reaction in the marketplace, on the financial markets, if Miliband is given that position, and that would seem to be, if Burnham goes ahead with that. If I know about it, he knows about it, and that would seem to be almost a thumb of the nose to the markets.
It's not just who gets appointed,
but it could be.
Yeah, not just it's who gets appointed to the Chancellor's position, but for the bond markets, it's a question of, are they serious about reducing the debt? And if they're not, the bond markets will punish them.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's kind of where we are. I mean, there's quite a lot of alarm in the UK at the moment. Burnham is obviously very bright, highly charismatic sort of guy. His policy background, or things that he talked about in the Makerfield by-election, were re-nationalising the rails. He says by increment, so I'm not quite sure how that works, but as one company drops out, the state acquires it and then acquires the next, etc. That's what he's talking about there with re-nationalising the rail, rather than just imposing a national umbrella over it. But he's also talked about nationalising water services, one or two other things, Jack, which water in particular would require compensation payments to private companies in significant amounts, millions and millions of pounds.
There's not a single thing he's talked about that I can find during his campaign for Makerfield or his campaign to become the Prime Minister that talks about reducing government spending, which needs to happen, or creating growth. Not one.
They are a little hamstrung, and I was watching listening to the political pod. Is it all is politics?
The rest is politics. This is
thank you. Yeah, and there was much discussion about Brexit there, and I'm not talking about from an economic point of view, but Brexit clearly has not been successful. It's not perceived as successful by the UK people. In fact, there's a lot of people feeling sort of highly betrayed. But we haven't seen either side, like when we're talking about the collapse of support for the major parties, we haven't seen either side step up and say, look, we got it wrong. No one's come along and said, look, it was a terrible thing and we shouldn't have done it. There's no way out of it. I mean, the EU won't, even if they had a referendum tomorrow and it was 65 remain or re-enter, 65%, the EU would be well inclined to look at this and go, well, are you sure? 'Cause
Well, this was
you put us through a lot of heartache the last time.
In a sense, it wasn't party political. The Conservative Party was split probably 60%.
Near enough to 50-50.
50-50, perhaps a slight majority to leave, and the Labor Party was split pretty much the same, perhaps 60 to stay and 40 to leave. So, in a sense, there's nothing the political parties have got to apologise for. It was, a decision that they didn't make, but that the voters made.
What I guess the reference is that the political class got this quite badly wrong. And that is why, or one of the reasons why, there's a sort of loss of public confidence in the old battlegrounds of Labor v the Tories.
Well, in a sense,
I don't want to get stuck on Brexit, but the way Brexit was sold to the UK public, Jack, was that the UK was going to become the Singapore of Europe. It was going to become that sort of financial sector, the standalone with its own set of rules, etc., that would encourage investment and all that sort of stuff. And none of that happened. I mean, it would make sense if it did happen. It's the only economic model that actually works had they pursued that kind of arrangement, a sort of Dubai in Europe, if you like. But nothing else makes sense, Jack, about just trying to battle away. Starmer's policy, which Burnham is said to accept, is that the UK should have closer trade ties with the EU. And you go, hello. So yeah, I mean that's basically my take on Brexit.
But the
it
political
could have
class
worked if they were prepared to pursue it, but if they were prepared to pursue a certain business model, but that was never the plan. The plan was essentially, it's a psyop, like a lot of things, and the plan was essentially to destabilise the UK politically and socially.
Well, I agree with you that the implementation was poor. The political class was overwhelmingly in favour of remaining in the EU. It was not the political class who decided that vote. It was the people. It was the voters who said, no, we don't accept what you're telling us. We want to go. So that's the disconnect with the major parties. It's largely people who wanted to leave. That's what reform's base is. That's why they're...
Yeah, when we're talking about the attribution of blame and whether it's implementation or the very referendum itself, one bloke has walked away pretty much unscathed, while the Tories and Labor have been belted from pillar to post.
Yeah, and they're still... You can tell the people they're wrong, but they're still being belted because, in a sense, the political class resisted what the people wanted. Once David Cameron offered them a choice, the voters said, this is what we want. And the political class said, no, you're wrong. But that disconnect between the voters and the political class hasn't been healed yet. And that's part of the reason why reform's so strong.
Well, one thing I will say about Burnham that I certainly do agree with, and this is something that he said during the campaign, this is the last chance for Labor. I'm not sure that the Conservatives may get another one, but Labor, this is, if they get this wrong, then you can only see a future where the political environment in the UK, particularly around parties, is in a state of real fracture.
Yeah, no, I don't accept that. I don't think it's Labor's last chance. There's every chance they might lose the next election, but I don't think it'll be the death of the Labor Party, or probably, I mean, it may be the death of the Tories, but I doubt that as well. This is just this is kind of politics, not as usual, politics a bit rougher than normal, but I don't think it's the death of politics. 7
prime ministers in 10 years.
Yep.
I mean, we were on that kind of pace ourselves there between 2007, let's say 2009, and really Albanese's election in 2022. What did we have there? Rudd, Gillard, Rudd, Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison, and finally Albo. So we're on
Morrison.
We're on the 7 as well.
Morrison was PM for
twice.
for quite a while. Won an election, won a return to government, and there were all sorts of reasons for that. And partly that was personalities, to be quite honest. In that particular case, there were personalities involved in that were not suited to long-term stable government. I think would be a fair way to put it, a polite way to put it.
Well, one thing I would say is that one thing we can be fairly certain of, but having fixed parliamentary periods in the UK, it's 5 years. Once you're elected, you have a mandate to govern for 5 years, fixed term. And while there are the opportunities for early elections in the UK, it hasn't stabilised. These little things like that have not stabilised. There's an argument in Australia that we should have our federal government elected every 4 years on a fixed basis, Jack. But it certainly hasn't reduced the sort of confusion that around leadership and often uproar and change, and it hasn't sort of stabilised the party or the pluralism within the sort of two-party system either.
No. One of the things it does do, it actually allows a longer period of disconnect between what a parliamentary party thinks and what the voters who vote for it think. And I think it's probably fine in the state government in Australia, but it would be a very, very poor move indeed in the federal government.
Well, I think we could say that quite comfortably about Morrison's second term.
Yes.
I think we can happily say that, that he was sort of against all the odds, won the 2019 election, and it was almost like, and I remember writing about this at the time, it's almost like we didn't expect to win, so we weren't quite ready to govern.
Yes.
We thought we were going to get, we're all going to be looking for jobs. All right. Just a bit of a...
That happened in the UK as well. Mrs May won an election, and she and most of the parliamentary Conservative Party were utterly opposed to leaving the EU. But their voters were really wanting to go. So there was a disconnect between their own voters and what the parliamentary party wanted to do. And that led to a considerable amount of instability. Fixed terms are a really poor idea.
You don't believe in foreign intrusion into this matter, Jack? You can be fairly comfortable. I'm not trying to be conspiratorial. You can be fairly comfortable that the UK's enemies played at least a role in the promotion of Brexit, and that's we are talking about the Russians essentially. That Putin thrives off instability in Europe, and so this was. We could follow the money, but probably end up being pushed out of a window. But you can certainly take to the bank the fact that Putin will be sitting there. He might not have a lot to laugh about at the moment, but he'd be having a good old giggle about Brexit. That's not. I'm not buying that at all. I mean, this was something that was absolutely grassroots. It's what people wanted to do. I'm not buying grassroots either, Jack. Grassroots,
that's fine.
Very easily AstroTurf, mate. That's where you get your most of your grassroots political movements.
I've got a lot more faith in the common sense of voters than that.
Yeah, look, for a long time, media had pushed this idea that the Europe was pushing them around, and so you have to understand certainly the British mentality, maybe even the English mentality, and that is, this kind of stoicism, almost to the point of self-inflicted pain. That we are British and we are not God's chosen people, but we are British and we are proud and all this sort of stuff. So a lot of it was national, sort of a poor reflection of national identity. But it's done them no bloody good. I think the BBC published a list of winners and losers, so 5 winners and losers, the top 5 winners and losers, according to them. And obviously that's a subjective analysis. But number 4 was dock workers in Rotterdam, who are apparently as busy as buggery, one-legged bricklayers in Tehran. It hasn't been edifying, and I think that there are political consequences for the political class going forward, whether they got it right or wrong, or whether they supported it or not. People are going to blame the political class when things go awry. All righty, under the MOU, the Iran MOU. There's a lot going on here, Jack. I'll let you lead it off.
Well, I think we were a week ago, in a sense, in that we don't really know what's going to happen.
Well, the Iranians did announce they were closing the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know how far they got with that. That was on Saturday.
I keep an eye out for the CENTCOM report. CENTCOM's the central command that the US runs in the region. And they publish
Twitter account, Jack.
Yeah, they run reports on it. The most recent one I said, well, it's open, not quite operating normally, but it's open. And this is not written in the State Department. This is written by the grunts on the ground, so it's more reliable.
But it is one way that the Iranians can continue to pester and destabilise the process, Jack. It is just something that they can do without having to launch missiles at bases and things like that.
They've got a limited number of tools, and that's one of them.
And it's a pretty strong one, Jack. And that's because of the political cycle that the US is in at the moment. You've got midterms coming. Trump very keen to get this sorted. So oil will flow again through the Strait of Hormuz, and petrol prices or gas prices will decline in the United States, and overall inflation will come off the heat. Will come off its current political heat in the United States before the midterms.
I saw yesterday he was back to talking up people's 401ks. This is their retirement savings accounts, and how they're doing better now because the market's going up because of the memorandum of understanding. But of course, a memorandum of understanding is just a kind of a basic framework agreement. There's no real
it kicks the most contentious stuff down the road.
And there's no guarantee that the stuff that's in the you do these things in business all the time. There's no guarantee what's in the MOU ends up being in the final agreement. Right? This is just
true enough.
It's an agreement to sit down and talk.
It just seems it gives Trump the political fix. What I'm saying is it gives Trump potentially the political fix so he can cast a political message. I did see USA Today's poll had Trump's approval rating at 30, just a 30 even, which is seems to have broken that barrier of around about 40% disapproval, and he's now into the low 30s, according to one poll.
And as I say, the market has improved. So this is what it is. This is a buy time. Let's agree to sit down and talk. And what's actually in the final agreement, I won't say Lord only knows, but it isn't clear, at least to me, what's going to be in it.
Well, look at, free tickets to Disneyland and who knows what else, mate. The Mullahs can stay at Mar-a-Lago for a couple of weeks.
I think Iran's a bit hilly for golf courses, but,
but the point I'm trying to make is that with Iran well and truly aware of all these people are, not aware of where we are in the political cycle in the United States, and that if they feel that they're not going all that well in negotiations, getting strong-armed or whatever it is, Strait of Hormuz are closed. You just know that's the way it's going to go. So it's almost sort of makes negotiation impossible. But we'll see how we go. You're quite right. It's a work in progress. It doesn't look all that flash. And I think there is a political consequence that Trump is paying for that in the United States with his approval ratings. He did sell to his MAGA crew. His MAGA crew are probably all going to stick staunch with him. But he did tell the American people, no more forever wars, all this sort of stuff. So there's a bit of a sense of alarm, not least at the cost of all of this thing, Jack. I just wanted to go, we did talk about US missile stockpiles, and I'm not trying to hurl this in on you, but there was a congressional hearing that Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, was quizzed on, Jack. So he said the US missile stockpile needs at least an $80 billion injection. That's the request. That's a request he's taken to the Congress to replenish the stocks. And under questioning, he said it could take months or years to months at first, and then his his response to the next question was it could take years. But there are other issues around the missile
2030, I believe, is the kind of medium anticipation to get back to a full stockpile.
All right, well, let's go through it. The US fired an estimated 130 to 250, that's a fairly big range, 130 to 250 SM-3 interceptors. That's the Navy's premier ballistic missile killer. They're the most expensive standard munitions in the arsenal at roughly $28.7 million apiece. It also expended up to 290 THAAD interceptors. That's a sort of missile defence stuff, which cost $15.5 million each. Offensive strike missiles. The US military launched over 1,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles. That's one of the things they're struggling for. And roughly 1,000, you might remember the Ukrainians were after some Tomahawk cruise missiles. The real reason was that not just post-Iran, that the US did have a stockpile issue around Tomahawks themselves. And what the conflict has actually highlighted, Jack, is that there are particularly sort of choking problems along the supply route for US munitions. Acting Pentagon Controller Jules Hurst III testified to lawmakers that the active conflict itself cost roughly $29 billion in direct expenditures, a massive proportion of which was purely the literal burning of missile inventory. Expensive stuff, Jack. The pure cost of replacing the physical, this comes from a US naval industry website. The pure cost of replacing the physical missiles is only part of the financial equation because the conflict exposed massive supply chain bottlenecks I was just talking about. The Trump administration has introduced a staggering $1.5 trillion total defense budget request for fiscal year 2027, a nearly 50% increase over standard historical funding levels. With that massive request, Hegseth has earmarked a record-breaking $70 billion specifically for munitions procurement. It increased by 3 times, and includes an $11.4 billion line item, just to buy 857 THAAD interceptors, missile defence, as I say, and billions more allocated to a reconciliation fund that we're talking about, which is part of the MOU, Jack. So it comes at a decent price tag, and we are now seeing the US veer into dangerous levels of debt, surely, Jack.
And the other thing that will come out of this will be a lot of change in technology. I mean, one of the things you always see after this sort of thing, this sort of conflict, is that people will say, well, what worked and what didn't, and what could work better and what could work better for less. I mean, the Ukrainian, and this is happening in Ukraine as well.
Yeah, look, these missile defence systems are getting more and more restrictive. They're still not perfect. The the physics involved in firing a missile at a missile and striking it. It's quite extraordinary in itself. But those things, these sort of dome defence type anti-missile defence systems are very, very expensive in themselves. But increasingly, we live in a world where we don't have soldiers fighting one another from fixed positions, tanks rolling in. It's more missile strikes and airstrikes.
I saw a demonstration video the other day of a new bit of kit the Ukrainians are using, just a shoulder-held, relatively expensive piece of kit that intercepts Russian drones and seems to do it seems to do it really successfully, and costs really bugger all.
Yeah, and it's really it's almost antithetical that spending more on military is going to give you better outcomes. It can often lead, and I think the Australian procurement's history is such that you can just, if you spend a lot of money, you can waste a lot of money.
Yeah, I think the idea that the Western countries should be spending 3% of their GDP on defence is a good one in principle, but that's not the end of the story. It's no point in spending 3% of your GDP if you can't defend yourself or harm your enemies. And you've got to spend the money better, certainly a lot better than Australia has spent it over the last 50, 60 years.
Exactly right. And what war does give us, Jack, is this sort of supercharging of innovation around weapon systems and what have you. And I think, even 5 years ago, and I'm saying before the Ukrainian conflict, we had no real idea of just how important drone technology is now in warfare. And a lot of countries have had to catch up very, very quickly.
Well, I'm sure the government across the border here would be looking at the lessons of Venezuela and Iran and saying, are our anti air defence kit?
Well, that's what Ukraine
is that kit good enough?
That's what Ukraine needs. That's what Ukraine needs. Crucially, is air defence systems. They're starting to roll them in from Europe, but the Europeans don't have the quality kit that the Americans do. But that's, I think that if they had solid air defensive systems in their major cities, they'd essentially be winning this war. We're going to move now on to, this is following on from Pauline Hanson's speech at the National Press Club. Jack and I had very, very different views on that. But one thing she suggested was that we could have people from all walks of life come here, but we would not be multicultural. We would be monocultural. Jack's got a bit of an example here of Denmark, which we'll get to, Jack, but please start us off by saying, what's a monoculture?
I don't think that perhaps even Ms. Hanson doesn't really know. I'm not quite sure. And
well, in agricultural terms, it means you plant the same genus of seed in the same paddock, more or less, with crop rotation, and you have the same, ears of wheat, etc. Over and over again.
I'm not sure she was talking about growing wheat.
Look, she may have been. Who knows? But so this idea of a monoculture is it's really a fantasy, isn't it?
Well, I guess it sort of depends what it ends up meaning. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I said this last week, that the idea that you would require people to speak English flies in the face of Australian history. That we had lots and lots of post-war migrants who ended up with fairly inadequate English. In fact, I think I cited the fact that as a lawyer, I had lots of them as clients, and I spent most days with interpreters, right? And yet that all worked quite well. The Danes have taken a different view. they've actually, and this is sort of bipartisan in Denmark and has been for quite a while now. It was started by one of the kind of centre-right parties, but the centre-left parties are going even harder, I think. They're getting much tougher on refugees in all sorts of ways. It's temporary protection, etc. But they're insisting upon civic integration. Permanent residence, citizenship, family reunifications require passing Danish language tests, and then employment self-sufficiency periods, 3 years plus full time before you can bring our family in. And you've got to do civic knowledge and integration programs. They're seeking to make their migrants kind of as Danish as possible before they get any real status in Denmark. Australia's not done that, but it has encouraged all the way along. We used to call them New Australians, and this has been Europe's weakness with their dealing with migration, is that there is no pathway to become, French or German. In Germany, the Turkish guest workers who went there in the 1950s are still Turkish guest workers. They're not Germans.
I see what you mean. But I think that the greatest threat through Hansonism, Jack, is that we will start creating sort of tiers in our society, levels in our society that already she sort of pointed to, between citizens and permanent residents, between for those people on student visas. So one thing she mentioned, I think, was a figure of 1.6 million people coming to the country, when that, obviously included short-term stays, including tourist visas, Jack.
I don't think that the idea, as she set it out so far, is politically saleable. That is,
I don't even think it's legally saleable. Now, I went looking for this, Jack, but this idea that permanent residents, and I know Barnaby Joyce had that rather difficult interview with Andrew Bolt, but one thing that they're talking about is to say to permanent residents, most of whom have been given permanent protection orders. I think that's right, isn't it, Jack?
There's all sorts of ways to get to permanent resident.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Please go on, tell me.
You can just be an ordinary. They're not all refugees. This is all sorts of migrants get to permanent residency, and then after a period can apply for citizenship. It's the step before citizenship.
Well, what is being proposed is that people who are, and the coalition policy is opaque on this as well. The permanent residents who may have acquired property. I'll just go back a bit. Students, people on student visas in this country, they can purchase property, can't they?
Yes.
It's rare. I think there's something like 3,000 dwellings that we could put down to them. It's rare, and there's a limit on it in terms of a monetary value. And I think it's $1 million, but I could be correct. I'd stand corrected if that's not the case. And a purchase of anything more than $1 million, the Foreign Investment Review Board takes a stand, and if you're making application to them, it costs a lot of money just to make those applications. So student visas, students in this country are not essentially holding up or causing a housing crisis. Moving on to what One Nation is kind of lamely proposing is that people who are permanent residents but not citizens may be required to sell their homes. I mention the student visas because if you do acquire a home as a student, as I say, there are restrictions on it. But the way in which you purchase that property up front is that you would, if you go home, you are required to sell it within a 3-year period.
Mm.
Now, what One Nation is saying is that the number of permanent residents in this country, and it's a little unclear to get a specific term, but it's hundreds of thousands of people. If they are homeowners, they would be required to sell their place. The difference is that they had acquired that property in good faith, and they would be forced to sell it potentially at a financial disadvantage. I don't see how that passes the High Court.
Or I think it probably would. You've got to look at what problem that's addressing.
Hang on. Let's go back there. You think the High Court, with the just means, we're not talking about Commonwealth acquisitions necessarily, are we? But if someone says, look, I'm a permanent resident and these laws weren't in place when I purchased the property and I'm buggered if I'm going to sell it, what happens? Ugly scenes, forcible evictions, etc. In places, the property's being fire sold.
To be honest, I don't think the High Court would interfere with it. But that's me.
I'm really interested to hear more, Jack.
Well, I just don't think they would.
Is there something shaky about our property laws, Jack?
No.
And this is what I'm talking about, creating these two tiers of status, or two or more tiers of status of Australians.
Well, there are tiers of status. A permanent resident is not the same as a citizen.
But that permanent resident, has a job, earns money, pays taxes, buys property.
But it still isn't the same as being a citizen.
No, I understand that you don't get a tree and you don't get a little flag and you don't have a ceremony, but you work, you pay taxes, you engage in the community, you buy property without restriction or restraint.
You get most of the status of being a citizen, but not all of it. And the government and the law allows there to be discrimination between people who are permanent residents and people who are citizens on certain matters. And,
all right, so legally it's possible.
Yes.
But politically, I mean, how do you deal with, let's say, 400,000 permanent residents, let's say some are married, some have children, let's say 1 million people, and of that, half a million don't comply. You've got 500,000 people being forcibly evicted from their homes.
I don't think that's going to happen. What I was trying to say to you before is you've got to look at what this is addressing, and it's a problem that's been going on for some time, and not just in Australia, is that people using student visas and migration visas, generally high net worth individuals from a few different countries, and using, say, a student who enrolls at the University of Melbourne, and the parents from India or China or Vietnam want to get funds out of that country. A really easy way to do that is to buy a $10 million property in South Yarra for the kid to live in, right? Because you get the asset.
That would trigger the FIRB process,
which is why they have that, and which is why they have the requirement that you've got to dispose of the property. You can't permanently shift your assets there forever without meeting the steps from permanent.
Well, as I say, there's a limit on it, and I'll clarify to our listeners next week just what that limit is. But you can acquire property up to, and I think it's $1 million. It might be $1.5 million.
And those things have been changing all the time.
But anything beyond that goes into the FIRB under the Foreign Investment Review Board restrictions, and so let's say Dad wants to buy a student a house in Toorak for $12 million, that would be reviewed by the FIRB. And not just that, the cost of applications for someone who wants to buy a property above the imposed limit would, if they have returned home, have to place the property up for sale within 3 years, or have sold the property within 3 years, and that's understood when they acquire it. What I'm saying is that if someone has not been party to this and finds that the laws have changed and that they would be required by law to sell their properties, I mean, this is essentially one nation policy, Jack.
All I will say is, and I haven't read One Nation's policy on this, but I will tell you this, that the rules around this have been changing constantly for 20 years, 25 years. And there's a reason for that, is they're always trying to fix some perceived problem. Just because you think you know what the future's going to hold, you might not. This is an area where they will change the rules on you.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure that, I tend to agree that politically that poses all sorts of risks, and socially too. I mean, the consequences of that form of division, ugly scenes with the bailiffs knocking on the doors and things like that.
Well, practically speaking, the way these things work is they affect relatively few people, because most people fit within whatever the requirements are.
Well, there are approximately, I think, 450,000 is the best guess of permanent residents in the country.
Who own houses.
Yeah. Who are homeowners, 450,000. So, that's the existing number. And that's an AI figure, so it could easily be wrong.
And probably the vast majority of those are using permanent residency as a stepping stone to citizenship and won't be going anywhere, and will just go through, right?
Because I think that's what permanent residency is fundamentally, isn't it? It's just a stepping stone towards citizenship.
Well, not for everybody. For most people, it's just a staging post to.
But
I mean, some people.
We've also got long delays instead of in citizenship ceremonies and actually processing people for citizenship. So there are 5 to 6 year waiting queues, Jack, to get that through too. So one imagines if
shortage
there's a
of
long
gum
list of people of that 450,000, a significant number will have applied to become Australian citizens, but won't be, let's say, within a period where this legislation would come through.
A delay like that in citizenship ceremony seems to me to be quite fixable, unless there's a terrible shortage of gum trees to hand out,
Yeah, well, that might be it. I doubt it, but that might be it. But I'm just saying that there are people who are caught in betwixt and between. It would seem to be one of these blanket policies that really doesn't have any future. And would cause massive division along the way. It's just pointing out that perhaps One Nation haven't quite thought all this through just at the minutes. Look, we'll go back to Norway.
Sure, there's a lot they haven't thought through. But in terms of the monoculture, I don't think the monoculture idea can work.
Well, we just determined it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
you can't have your band me and eat it too, Jack.
Yeah. Well, but
that was in the Herald today. I think.
Yeah. Oh, well, there you go. We don't have the same kind of multiculturalism that they have in Europe, and I think some of the commentators are mistaking that. I mean, the multicultural. I think this is a long time ago, because Sarkozy was still president of France, and David Cameron was Prime Minister of the UK, and Angela Merkel was Chancellor in Germany, and they all declared that multiculturalism, 2015, I think, that multiculturalism in Europe had been an utter failure, and they were right. But what they were doing with multiculturalism in Europe is quite different to what Australian multiculturalism.
Yeah, I see sort of any tensions that exist in Australia being amplified for political gain, when essentially we don't have these problems around citizenship and national identity. Anyway, but there's always the fault lines in our country, and I think One Nation. Politically are designed to, Hanson and Reinhardt and the whole gang are designed to be in the business of division, because, it makes headlines. There's a whole lot of social media bots and things driving it along. We'll probably have a longer look at this, because I haven't. But Jack, if you look at polls a lot, and if we look at the rise of One Nation, when did it happen? Can I ask you that question for your homework next week? Because it wasn't in the immediate wake of the election, right? So so it was several months later. And there are a number of incidents around that involving Hansen and Reinhardt that need to be examined in terms of where the money's coming from, in terms of where, shall we say, the promotion of one nation policies is coming from. And it's a really interesting picture. So we'll talk about that next week too, not as a major issue, but just to follow up on it. All righty. Well, it is time to move on to sport. So we've got a list of things to talk about. The major story will be sort of corruption, etc., with the lead point being the rather limp laws involving congressional equities investments. And move on from there and make some comparisons around the world. And we also want to talk about when did One Nation rise and what was going on there. All right. Let us move on. Cooking. We'll just move on to this one, Jack. Cooking, a comment from Britain. My son just said the truest statement ever. This is from, I presume, a mother. And the difference between
father,
cooking...
actually.
Father. The difference between cooking on a barbecue or in an oven is whilst cooking on a barbecue, it's perfectly acceptable to have 4 points while cooking. Yes, well, that's why Jack used to, my father used to barbecue. It's become, you see a lot of houses now, they've got full kitchens outside in Australia. Huge barbecues, fridges, sinks, all that sort of stuff. And a lot of people just do them, and particularly if you're living north of, I don't know, let's say Coffs Harbour, you'd be outside most of the time anyway. And cooking outside's a bit of a thing. In my part of the world, Jack, I'll use the barbecue rather than cook a steak or some chicken or whatever over the stove in the kitchen and stink the place out. I'll cook it all on a barbecue, and we'll do the veggies and etc. in the kitchen.
A mate from Melbourne says, when I was a kid, we used to walk out into the backyard to the dunny and crap outside and cook inside, and now we do the reverse. The bathroom's on the inside and the cooking's done outside.
It actually makes a bit of sense. And you've got to say, if you're cooking a nice piece of steak, it tastes better off the barbecue than it does in a pan. It just does. Maybe it's the years of encrusted meat still sort of hanging stubbornly onto the grill in my barbecue, Jack. But it definitely tastes better than something out of the pan.
This is not exactly the most suitable climate for barbecuing outside, I've got to tell you.
Well, it's a bit hard on a balcony too. I mean, I know it happens, but bit hard to get out in the balcony, and you just don't. I suppose in most of these balconies you don't have a lot of room, and you've got a lot of wind and stuff, so you can't have anything that's light out there. Otherwise, that's just going to go over the top and kill someone on the ground floor.
Well, we had a flat for a while that had a semi-enclosed balcony that used to work, but you'd basically barbecue the dinner and then come inside and change your T-shirt before you sat down because you were kind of soaked through.
Yeah, well, I get a bit of that too. Look, it's not just that you're in humidity. You're standing in front of a flame that's at 400, 450 degrees. So hot days, you need to replenish fluids, and that is a health tip that I think both Jack and I endorse. Stay heavily hydrated if you're barbecuing. Moving on to sport, Jack. The World Cup dominating our televisions at the moment. I noticed you didn't put in the fact that Australia beat Bangladesh in the T20 series, I think 3-0. I may be wrong.
No one's taking...
I had almost zero interest. I did watch a little bit of one game.
I can't find anybody who's interested in talking about it.
Well, it's part of the problem. I prefer to watch that than I would one of the league games, if one of the franchise games, because at least it's an international and people are obviously pretty serious, but it is hard to get involved, get invested in a lot of the short form cricket.
I mean, especially here, there's much more interested in cricket wise. in the Test series, because most of my friends are Test fans rather than T20 fans.
Well,
and there's lots of English amongst them, so there's much more interest in that.
We also do, and we also do have the Women's World Cup in ODIs. Australia undefeated so far in that tournament, and red hot favourites to win it. So we're trying to traduce that. That's a significant event. Australia is sort of in a bit of a rebuild as well. Did very well the other night against Pakistan. I saw Pakistan knocked it over for not many, but Australia batted first and lost a wicket, I think, in the first or second ball. And then Perry and one of the new players put together 100 odd, and they got away with it. So they're going okay. But in the World Cup, that's the one taking all our time. There are 40,000 Colombians in Australia, Jack, and they seem to get out. Every single one of them seem to get out and enjoy their team playing. Big shot of a whole bunch of Colombians enjoying seeing their team play.
Well, I was talking to a publican the other day. He says, I didn't know we had that many. I didn't know we had a pub full of Colombians in Hong Kong, and they were all here, he said.
Well, we did, the ABC, God bless them, this is a good piece of work. They actually traced down some people from Cape Verde. Capo Verde, I think, is the way it's spelt in the FIFA designation, and they seem to track them down. I think they said there were something like 20 in Australia, and they tracked them down. They were very, very pleased to be involved as well. Big game tomorrow, Jack. I honestly don't think there will be a lot of work going on in Australia after about 1:30 tomorrow.
Yeah, I got an American mate's on the plane now going down, and they're I think they got a private room at Lamaro's in South Melbourne for 25 people or something, and that's going to be the afternoon done for them.
I shall be at lunch at the Imperial Hotel. We actually booked, so we've got a seat in the bistro, because I think there might be a few along there. Who knows? But like when I rang the book, I don't think he was quite aware of what's going on. But 2:00 tomorrow. Australia plays Paraguay. A win there guarantees them a move into, is it the quarterfinals or is it the 16?
The round of 32.
It can't be the 16s.
No.
Anyway, to the next group, there are 48. So this will be down to the next 24, won't it? There'll be 24 cut. There'll be 32 left. So it's the top two and the next best 8. Sort of repechage. Well, not a repechage, but you know what I mean, the highest losing qualifier sort of thing.
Yeah, so, if Australia were to draw, they'd almost certainly make the...
how many did you say? 32?
32.
So 8x4 again.
Yeah.
So, look, obviously if Australia wins tomorrow, they'd have a chance at sneaking through.
Well, if they win tomorrow, they're in. They're
in. So,
but even a draw might get them through.
Wonderful game against Turkey, and then I was battling to sleep, so I sort of hung in there till 5:00, and they were a completely different side against the Americans. Very shaky with the footy, with the ball. US had, I think, about 65% of possession for the entire game, just dominated it, and we were giving it up. So hopefully we'll have a return of form from Turkey. Who of the sides have impressed at the moment? There've been a few of the big nations, the big football playing nations have had, as we said, England and Ghana with a draw the other day, set them back a bit. It looks like the Netherlands are probably going better than anyone else. Mexico.
Who's been going really well? Well, the Brazilians, they're through.
They're not considered to have a strong side. I just know this talking to my football-loving mates. Switzerland beat Canada today. Bosnia and Herzegovina, they were belted in their first round. They've had a 3-1 win over Qatar. Morocco 4, Haiti 2, high scoring. But Brazil beat Scotland by 3-0. That won't keep the Scots away from partying. They look like the Scottish supporters look like they're having a ball over there. And yeah, so Colombia had a win, as I say. Very happy Colombians in Australia. Norway 3-2 over Senegal. And I guess the other one that's sort of standing out, mentioned the Netherlands, who had a big win earlier on, beat Sweden, who'd won their first game, beat Sweden 5-1. And the other sides that are, perennials, Argentina and France. France had kicked 3 against Iraq and Argentina 2 against Austria. They're the standouts for me. England, maybe. I wouldn't mind if England won. The worst thing, of course, would be if the Americans won, but that seems to be quite a long shot.
The big Norwegian Erling Haaland was interviewed after they won, which put them through to the next round, and they've just got France to play. And he said, seems like a very nice and quite funny young man. And he said, well, we're through. So this is what we came here telling ourselves we had to do. We have France next, and they'll probably beat us, but then they'll probably go all the way and win the World Cup.
Yes. I see Messi just looks to be in ominous form too, so Argentina look pretty good here. There's a little bit of a story you've got there, Jack, on Cape Verde and how they came from nothing, the island group off the coast of Western Africa, with a population of about 350,000, or have I got that confused with Curacao?
And there's a bloke, their centre-back was playing for a suburban team in Dublin, Shamrock Rovers, actually owned by an Irish-Australian fella from Sydney, the club. And he was working, it's a part-time job, being captain of the Shamrock Rovers, and he's working in the bank, selling mortgages part-time as well. And he gets a LinkedIn comment, gets a LinkedIn approach from the Cape Verde, because his mum's from Cape Verde, so he's got the connection. He's got citizenship. He gets an approach on LinkedIn, as we all do. These notifications on LinkedIn, wanting to know whether he wanted to play football for the Cape Verde.
Because of his mother's,
yeah, and he couldn't read it because it was in Portuguese, and he doesn't speak Portuguese or read Portuguese, so he just ignored it. We all ignore LinkedIn stuff that comes to us, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually they figured out that their problem was that he didn't speak or understand Portuguese.
Doesn't check his LinkedIn account all that often.
So they sent him to something in English, and he said, "Oh yeah, that sounds all right." So he's the centre back for the team that's going quite well.
Excellent work. I mean, there are those little minnow stories in the first round of the FIFA World Cup, and it's quite lovely to see. Everyone seems to be having a good time over there. Meanwhile, Jack, rugby union, is the death of Australian rugby union overstated, premature?
No, but they've got a bit. I mean, the ticket sales for the Rugby World Cup next year,
you can't get them
they've
now.
been fantastic. They were expecting to sell 500,000, and they've sold 650,000 already, and it's going really well. But their problem is the international game is strong, but nobody wants to go and watch the Super Rugby. And in fact, the Super Rugby competition is kind of falling apart. They're really going to have to. I mean, it used to be really good, the Super Rugby competition.
And the big part of it, Jack, is this. There's sort of no, as you say, there's no state competition really. I mean, there kind of quasi is with the Super 15s. But then you go down there and you go into club rugby. And it seems to me that there's a level missing.
Yeah, there is. And I don't think the Super Rugby competition will survive, at least not in its present format. When it was Super 10, it was really popular. Getting a Waratahs ticket was You had to ring around. You couldn't just rock up. You had to ring around and get a corporate to get in. These days, the bouncers are out the front throwing them in rather than throwing them out. Right?
It is I don't know how whether these rules still apply, but it is, I'm sure, designated to be, and I imagine all Australian games will be free to wear. Every Wallaby game will be free to wear, but obviously the finals and so will be free to wear, but the rest of it will be doled out. What was that called, Jack, where the government could impose on broadcasters certain events, AFL Grand Final, NRL Grand Final?
Yeah, I can't recall the name. They had
I think to some degree it's still in place. But the landscape's changing so fast now with, these big telcos now in engaging in, buying sports rights, Jack. The Prime covers the Women's World Cup we talked about before, the ICC Women's World Cup. Obviously SBS are doing their level best with a huge coverage of the World Cup, but you can get a lot of that stuff. I'm not sure if it's strictly kosher, but you can get a lot of that stuff. There are FIFA designated things on YouTube, so I'll have a bit of a look through the highlights there and go through who's won and lost during the day. Anyway, enjoying the World Cup at the moment, but I've only had the one very early night and it's going to be a big afternoon tomorrow in Australia. Carlton, they're kind of the story of the season, the Carlton Football Club now. Not just about its resurrection, but if you look at the entire series season to date, there's this incredible sort of roller coaster ride. They won their first game, probably should have lost it. Lost the next 8, coach removed, won the next 5 with an interim coach. And they look to be a completely different side. It's hard to know what's happening. And when the players are interviewed, they make much of Voss and his contribution. But there doesn't seem to be anything that's, I'm sure that they are focused on things that we don't know about, but they are scoring from turnover, as well as Fremantle are. And this was always a problem with Carlton. They'd get the footy and then, basically smack it into the forward line and without a lot of connection. And that seems to have stopped. They've got, I think, 6 players, either 21 or younger, 2 18-year-olds, including Harry Dean, who, if he doesn't win the Rising Star, something's wrong. I think a couple of 19-year-olds and a 20-year-old, and I think they've brought enormous enthusiasm into that, situation. But Patrick Cripps he'd probably have, I would say, at least 12 Brownlow votes from the last 5 weeks. I'm sure wouldn't have too many argument that he's got 4 best on grounds and might not poll in that 5th game against Essendon. His leadership has been extraordinary. Sam Walsh has stepped up. The forward line seems to work without having a monster forward. Harry Mackay, I guess, falls into that. But not being star-studded as the Fremantle guys. So you just can't get, last 4 or 5 weeks, the real struggle getting the ball. Other sides have had a real struggle just getting the ball out of Carlton's forward line. Intense pressure. Blokes like Frankie Evans, 3-club bloke. What's his name? I was going to say Kieran Byrne, but it's not Kieran. The young 18-year-old who throws himself around like he's sort of one-off hand grenade. All these charging tackles, run-down tackles, and just divert, distract, and whenever the other side in their defence have got the footy, he's a country boy. I wish I could think of his name. Never mind. He's an absolute ripper. Lockie Cowan, he's only 21, Jack, and he is really stepping up. The number 2 defender there, one of their great, the sort of running halves. So it's like it's a different team. I know I said earlier I didn't think the list was that great, but I look across it now and think, yeah, all right, you could probably do with a power, like another power forward, but guys like McGovern and Kemp are at least handling their own. And there aren't too many holes there. Harry Dean, him coming into that side, it used to be if Jacob Wiedering was injured, we'd just get smashed, because just defensively not up to it. Wade Durkin, the bloke who came from Darwin to get a rookie contract with the Blues before the season started, he had a ripping game. Played on Hogan from Giants, and he had about 20 touches himself. Hogan kicked 1 goal. So there's something that's going on there. There's confidence and a lot of fun. Did you see how they sang the song on the weekend, Jack?
I did.
With Matty Cottrell bringing out the harmonica. I thought that was lovely. He's been essentially out of footy for almost 2 years, and came back, kicked a couple of goals. Bit of a heart and soul guy. They will reckon he's a special guy. He's a little bit unusual. So you always need those sorts of blokes too. So where they're going to go, I don't know. Fremantle look the best side by a considerable margin at the moment. But I did notice Buddy Franklin, who's very good at tipping, very, very good. He does a podcast with Shane Crawford. And Bud reckons Brisbane will win it, Jack. Still reckons Brisbane will win it. They're 8th at the moment. Play the Swannies tonight.
I think they'll win tonight. I think they'll win tonight.
Who wins that?
Brisbane.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think Brisbane are playing well enough at the moment.
No, I think Brisbane wins this tonight.
Oh, Brisbane wins tonight. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you said Sydney. I think Sydney will win. I have my money on them. I think they've just got a little bit too much talent around the footy. Maybe it's one of those must-win games for Brisbane. So I guess it's 6 to 1, half a dozen of the other. Who else is having a shocker at the moment? Check. What about the Pies? What's going on there? They're mature. It's almost the antithesis of list management, where their senior players are crackers still to this day, the side bottoms, the Pendleberries, these sorts of people. But the ones coming up through the young ones coming up, and the guys who've had 50 or so games now are struggling a bit. Collingwood, have you seen them? Have you seen them at all this year?
Look, I think they're kind of they're just marking time at the moment.
What happens when they have these retirements? And surely they'll come at the end of this season, the Pendlebury side bottoms, etc. Darcy Moore, will he play again? Probably, but he's battling with long-term injury, and I just sort of wonder how they're going to go. That said, they've still got the best player in the competition running around for him. Do you think that's right, or
he's in the top 4 or 5. I put it that way.
Everyone seems to place him at the top. I think Marcus Bonampelli's certainly very, very close if he's not the top. All right, finally, Ben Stokes, all has been forgiven, Jack. He just went out. He's lost his idea of time, and no harm done. And you better come back because no one else can or wants to be captain.
Well, you've got to pick your best player, don't you? You've got to pick your best captain.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's essentially being picked because he's a captain. Because he's probably his game's not good enough to get a Guernsey for England without him being captain.
No, he'd probably get a bowl.
Not what is he now? 35-year-old body and bone on bone knees. But yeah, look, he's a hell of a competitor with the ball. Yeah, he may get a Guernsey as a bowler. But who's the bowler who also sat it out?
Atkinson.
Yeah, Atkinson. Atkinson's a good player. Got a fair bit of time for him and Gus Atkinson. So he'll be back. And they play the Kiwis next week at Trent Bridge.
They do.
And if they lose, Jack, I mean, let's not forget they got an awful thumping from New Zealand at the Oval, beaten by 250-odd runs. It just seemed, it just seemed to me, well, it was their 6th loss in the last 8 tests.
Yes.
I mean, something's got to give.
Well, I think they're a lot better than that. I think their list is pretty good. They
haven't got a spinner, won't play a spinner.
Well, they won't play him, so we don't know whether he's up to it or not. But the batting's okay. The bowling's a little bit patchy, but the batting's quite good. And I don't know how Rob Key and Brendan McCullum survived the Ashes tour. I think there's something wrong with the culture, and there's something wrong with the thing. I mean, and sometimes you've just spent 10 minutes talking about Carlton. Sometimes you've got to get those things right, and the list all of a sudden looks okay.
Well, this is what Gideon Hay wrote in his on his cricket blog, Cricket et al. Very worth your money, folks, if you're thinking about it. It might cost you about 10 cents to get all sorts of cricket stuff, including the wonderful writing of Gideon Hay. This is how he started the review of the test at the Oval. England hit bottom, keep digging. 5 changes, 2 blokes unavailable because they were on the piss, 1 bloke out because his wife was pregnant, old stager as emergency captain, no spinner, a backstop as keeper, oh, he's terrible, and 4 number 11s. It could be a week at your local club or village. It was England coming into the Oval Test, and it's worked out as well as it usually does in abject humiliation by 253 runs to New Zealand. Quite a paragraph, that. Quite a magnificent paragraph. So, yeah, things aren't all going all that well, and I suspect if they get beaten in Trent Bridge, there will be hell to pay within English cricket.
And there should have been after the Ashes because...
Yeah, they just kicked that down the road too, didn't they? And, and then they dirtied up in New Zealand and came home and... Yeah, don't forget there's an Ashes series next year, folks. Yeah. So anyway, we'll see how they all go. And that takes us out. We've stretched a little bit. I do apologise for that. Probably shouldn't have babbled about Carlton all that much. But never mind, it is the story of the season in the AFL at least. So I'm entitled to speak about it. But with that, we shall leave you for... episode 162. I want to thank Jack for his work putting the show together, and we look forward to speaking with you next week. See you, folks.